Well, good morning, man. And on this fine morning, it is a wonderful thing to be focusing on becoming the man God wants you to be, becoming a man of integrity, becoming a man of purity, becoming a faithful man to your wife or your future partner. So that's where we're at. That's why we're here. That's why we encourage one another and we call each other to greatness. So I am glad you're here and have a real deep desire to encourage you. This particular talk this morning, empathy or the lack thereof, was actually inspired by a discussion I had with one of you, and just talked about how hard it was to kind of really feel the pain you've caused, and so yeah, I'm grateful. Matter of fact, I really am appreciative of the Lord who was really good at giving me extra perspective, way more than I know likely. But I went to bed last night asking God to just continue to clarify my heart of what I need to say to you. And I woke up 15 minutes before my alarm with a statement that I needed to discuss with you, and it was clearly the Lord prompted me, because I woke up out of my sleep going, I need to say this, and I just said, thank you, Lord. And so I'm not saying that everything I say is inspired or whatever. I'm just saying that there are times that clearly God prompts me and takes what would be maybe a good talk and make it really centered and helpful to really honor Him. And so this will be both hopefully understanding for you. It'll also be undoubtedly challenging for you. It'll also be hopefully encouraging, affirming for you. So the whole talk this morning is about empathy, or the lack of empathy in too many men who are struggling with addiction. So let's follow through with the notes I have here, and I will expound from there, but let's jump in. Do you really understand what your sexual addiction has cost your wife, or will cost your future wife, for those guys that are single? How far do you think you've come in appreciating and validating the losses your spouse has had to face because of your selfish actions? Let's see the level of empathy you have, or the lack thereof, based on our discussion on empathy. A bit of a discussion of what empathy is by definition, and then supplemented by my thoughts on what empathy is. Empathy is the ability to understand another person's thoughts and feelings in a situation from their point of view rather than your own. It involves looking and feeling life from their perspective. It is consciously thinking about how this is affecting them. How does this make them feel? Now, that short definition of 3 lines, it would be wise for you to reread that in your growth of empathy. The opposite of empathy can be callousness, harshness, heartlessness, cold-heartedness, like a real nasty extreme. Like empathy opposite could be that. But empathy opposite, it can also be oblivious. That means being unaware, unmindful, or blind to the hurts that you're caused. So you're kind of, did I hurt you? I don't, I can see that wouldn't be good, but you really don't get it. So empathy is the harshness, the angry, the reactionary side. Sometimes the lack of empathy is the opposite is, and it can also be this unaware, oblivious side. Another clarifying statement here is the next paragraph. You cannot empathize if you're constantly minimizing, downplaying, or even denying your negative behavior and its impact on your partner. If you're playing any kind of games of minimize, downplay, or deny, you don't get empathy. You cannot empathize if you're self-centered and self-absorbed. When stuck in this mindset, life is only about you. Matter of fact, many addicted men are so locked into viewing life from their perspective that virtually in almost every discussion, they can only look at issues from their vantage point only. They tend to shift the discussion on how it impacts them. You don't know how hard this is. Don't you know how this makes me feel? Well, you don't forgive me. I feel worthless. You see how they're making it about them. She's telling you about how she feels, how she hurts right now. And you go, well, it's not easy for me to hear that, as if basically don't say that again because I don't want to hurt anymore. Because an addict is all about avoiding pain, avoiding discomfort. So they would go to their addiction to deal with their discomfort, their negative feelings. And so a person who is moving towards empathy is one who doesn't shift the discussion about what it is doing to them, tries to stay present and sees what the discussion is doing in their partner's life. Now you're starting to feel what empathy is. Why the addict is usually not empathetic. Now, some are. The vast majority are not. And these are this is not exhaustive. This is just what I've seen, what I've sensed, what I've been told, obviously what I've learned and studied. But empathy thinks for others first, thinks about others first, where the addicts think about themselves first. Empathy is other-centered. Addicts are generally self-centered. Addicts serve one person, themselves and their needs. Empathy serves others. Addicts shape a world that revolves around them, where empathy revolves around others. You see, if the discussion involves what it's doing to your wife and how she's feeling, as opposed to what it's make you feel, then you're starting to understand more what empathy is. But an addict, he shapes his world around how this affects them. Addicts by nature are selfish and driven to gratify their needs. Addicts don't seem to be able to count the cost of their behavior on others. So thus the gap between many men who are addicted and the impact it's having on their spouse. How to measure if you're growing in empathy. And this is the part that I woke up at 5:16 this morning, and it was clear as a billboard in my mind that, and I'll tell you the one that was really clear. The greater the empathy, the greater the remorse. Now we're going to get to that because that's one of the 12 here that I've come up with. But you want to measure if you're growing in empathy? Move towards the second half of the list. So let's walk through those and see how you're doing. You just check in your mind how you're doing. Of course, you'll overestimate how good you're doing because that makes you feel good. But be honest, do a self-critique here. And by the way, for those guys who aren't married, you got to understand that in your current relationships, your guy friends, girlfriends that you have, in your current relationships, if you see that you're operating contrary to this list, you've got work to do before you get married. So, number one, the greater the empathy, the greater the admission of offenses committed. You're fully prepared to own your stuff. Number two, the greater the empathy, the greater the avoidance of any kind of minimizing, downplaying, dismissing, explaining away any wrongs. So the greater the empathy, you're going to stop doing that. The greater the empathy, the greater understanding of the trauma you have caused. I got a document that I'm going to give you to look at the losses that your partner has experienced and to actually go through it with her and see how well you are scoring the impact of your addiction on your spouse. Number four, the greater the empathy, the greater the willingness to take responsibility for wrongs. See, there's no hiding, no dodging. You own it. Number five, The greater the empathy, the greater remorse towards your spouse. Remorse is sorrow, is a sense of almost horror for what you see it now, and you say, well, but I didn't know I was hurting her this way. So if you would even call it, well, it was inadvertent or accidental, but if it wasn't your intent, you should even be more sorrowful. You shouldn't say, well, I didn't mean to, or, I wasn't doing it to hurt you, or all that kind of game of minimization. Remorse is sorrow and hurt for what you have done. Number 6, the greater the empathy, the greater the humility and the killing of pride. See, pride will justify, pride will minimize, pride will make it about them. I did that because you, right? Pride, a transformed man is a humble man, is a gentle man. Did a whole talk on that. So it's the killing of pride that does any kind of self-justification or explanation or whatever. Pride comes before a fall, and pride and self-justification comes before a relapse, just so you know. So greater the empathy, the greater the remorse. The greater the empathy, the greater the willingness to be accountable to others. You see, you're starting to see that your wife can't be the one to fix this. So you've got to go to outside wingmen, a band of brothers, to be accountable to as a gift to your wife. You obviously cannot get this freedom on your own. Good for you for being in this group, by the way. But there's this willingness to be accountable to others. You're not going to stay secret. You're not going to stay hidden. You're not going to say, I can do this on my own. And every man that relapses and stays stuck, he says this: I did it my way, right? Because my way's better. I don't need to do this program. I don't need to attend regroup all the time. But you see, coming regularly to regroup and being accountable to other men allows you to focus on the genuine changes that are needed in your life. And that's why, if you're growing in empathy, you're growing in your willingness to be accountable to others, because you see the gift it is to your spouse. That's why in my coaching of couples through this, I say, make sure that you have an accountability partner that your wife gives thumbs up to. Like make sure, because it's really important that she feels comfortable that I'm really glad you're accountable to that guy. I trust that guy, versus why that guy? That guy's as messed up as you. He won't hold you accountable. He'll go, oh, yeah, I understand. And it just allow it, right? And so we have some work to do. The greater the empathy, the greater the repentance and confession before God and men. It says in James chapter 5, verse 16, it says, confess your faults to one another and pray for one another that you may be healed. Now, so you confess your faults to God in the presence of someone else who can verify the honesty and sincerity of your prayer for forgiveness and your repentance and confession before God, that you've owned your stuff before God and other men. That's why even in the 12-step program, before God and another, and we share certain steps with other people as part of our journey. So there is this, the greater the empathy, the more there is a repentant heart towards God and owning things before God and one other. Number 9, the greater the empathy, the greater the patience in your healing journey. It could be a year or two for your wife to get over the hurts you've caused. And so just because you have apologized and hopefully come clean and on everything, it's not like, well, come on, honey. I apologized 2 weeks ago. Like, are you going to forgive me? Yeah, that's likely not your place to say. It's going to take her some time to work through all the different ways that she has been hurt by you. And you got to be patient in her healing journey. Number 10, the greater the empathy, the greater the hate toward your addiction. Don't be angry at your wife. Don't be angry at people who didn't coach you when you're young. Don't be angry at whoever. Get angry at, I don't want this. I'm pissed. I don't want to go here again. And start to get a little fire in your belly against the addiction, that you want to crush the addiction. And Jesus, help me to crush this addiction. Help me, Jesus, to get this out of my system. Help me, Jesus, to stop being so self-centered and selfish. Help me, Jesus, to make a turnaround. Help me, Jesus, to stay committed to this program. Help me, Jesus, to follow through. Help me, Jesus, because, you know, boys make excuses, but men make changes, right? So there's a disdain, there's a hate towards your addiction and a real desire. And so that's number 11, the greater the empathy, the greater the commitment to recovery and healing. When you do your work, when you attend group, you're starting to realize the impact of your addiction, and your wife just feels good about you doing the work of recovery. You see, you don't fully understand, but you're making an effort to eradicate the thing that caused so much pain. And so there's a great commitment to recovery, to be on the phone call. It's early in the morning. Or if you're in a Tuesday or Thursday night, it's quite a commitment to take an hour and a half, 2 hours in your week to stay in recovery, to keep growing, to work it through. But the greater the empathy, the greater the commitment to recovery. And finally, the greater the empathy, the greater the resolve to not hurt her this way again. Matter of fact, even to those single guys, the greater the self-awareness and the possibility of empathy being there, the greater your resolve to, when you get married, I will not put my wife through what Currie is helping the married man with right now. I will not put my wife through that. So get your healing done so that that beautiful lady that you end up marrying will not have to experience this grief and this hurt. So I'm going to repeat the one that was in my brain at 5:16 this morning when I woke up after asking God to show me what I need to say. And the greater the empathy, the greater the remorse. The greater the empathy, the greater the remorse. Hear that as if God were speaking, because that was what he told me I had to say to you this morning. Remorse, sorrow for the hurt you've caused. Empathy. Let's look at some of the couple of verses here. There's many, but I just wanted to camp on this one here. Do nothing out of selfish ambition. How about do nothing out of selfishness or vain conceit? I deserve this, you know, people don't understand it. It's self-delusion, conceitedness, you know, I do it my way, right? Rather in humility, interesting word. Humility. Did someone mention that word already? In humility, value your spouse above yourself. See, there's the first real sign of real empathy is when you're becoming other-centered. You value other above yourselves. Not looking at your interests, man, thinking only about you and how this impacts you, but each of you to the interests of your partner, how it's impacting them. And you can see clear evidence of empathy leaking out all over the place here. Let's go to the amplified version of the same two verses. Do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit through factional motives, that means strife and different things, but with an attitude of humility, being neither arrogant or self-righteous. It's amazing. I run into men who are addicted and hurt their spouse, and they're self-righteous. That means they think they're, well, now that I've done this, I am something. I've confessed and I'm changed, and they they overestimate their changes. And they become self-righteous. But with an attitude of humility, they regard others as more important than themselves. You see the other-centeredness right there. Do not merely look out for your own personal interests, which is what an addict does. He does what he does for his own personal interests, to meet his own needs. And that's all that matters. Do not merely look out for your own personal interests, but also on the interests and the perspective of your spouse. From the Passion Translation, we read this: be free from pride-filled opinions when you try to explain it away to your wife, for they will only harm your cherished unity with your spouse. Don't allow self-promotion. Well, I can't believe why you won't forgive me. I've been 5 weeks in recovery now. I'm going to this group every week, you know, like really, like what do you expect me to do? See, that's self-promotion. But in authentic humility, isn't that sweet when it puts authentic humility together? Like, don't just be authentic or be humble occasionally, but real authentic humility. Put others first and their views as more important than yours. Abandon every display of selfishness. Whoa, there's a real clear explanation of I'm really becoming empathetic. Abandon every display of selfishness. And then from the New Living Translation, just more affirmation of another clear understanding of these two verses, just these two verses. Don't be selfish, man. Don't try to impress your wife with, look what I'm doing, and I've read this. And okay, remember, checking boxes of things you've done is different than real change inside. Now, we do need to do the work, but we got to let the work permeate. You got to let the work saturate. We got to let the work fill every pore of our body to be genuinely changed. Not just, I read this 4 days in a row. I read it 5 days in a row. See? Okay, now, if you're not really open to change, it's like, something coming and hitting you and not going in. It's just hitting and bouncing off. You see? So that way you're trying to impress her with checking boxes. Be humble, thinking of your spouse as better than yourself. Don't look only onto your own interests, but take an interest in others too, and how life's affecting them. Wow, Philippians 2, 3, and 4 says it pretty clear, pretty strong. So you'll ask me, okay, Currie, how do I empathize with the hurt cause? The more of these principles that I throw out here now become true of you, the more you're becoming an empathetic man, an other-centered man. And I'm giving really specifics here. Thus, the nuances of some of these don't apply to all of you, because some of you would never do this kind of thing, but I've had it happen right in my office with the couple right there. And she's sharing how she hurts, and he starts to do things that show he doesn't have a foggy idea of what empathy is. So ask her how she's doing, and then shut up and really listen. Don't listen to try to explain it away. Don't listen to try to defend. Don't listen to try to minimize. Don't listen to set her straight. Ask her how she's doing and shut up and keep your mouth shut. Number two, if you listen to defend yourself or brush off your pain, it's going to mess you up. But and I obviously need some work on the wording there, but try to feel her experience. Don't try to lessen her experience. You can't take away her experience. Oh, I don't understand why you feel like that. No, if she's feeling like that, she feels like that. So don't defend yourself or brush off what she's feeling. Again, just listen. 3, really hard for the addict, because the addict's pattern is to avoid pain at all costs. So I'm going to ask you to stay right there in the discomfort of sensing the hurt you've caused her. Stay right there. Don't run. Don't talk. Just listen to her and sit in the pain. You recognize a powerful expression, an example of real support is in the book of Job, when his friends just came and sat with him in his horrific grief and didn't offer words of explanation or explaining why God allowed this. They just sat there with him in silence. They just put their arms around him and loved on him. And so just stay there in the discomfort. Just sit with her as she talks about the hurts that she's feeling, and breathe in the pain you've caused. Don't run, don't avoid. Stay right there. Matter of fact, number 4, ask her to share other ways that you've hurt her. Honey, tell me more. What else? Now that you're opening up to me, just tell me more. And listen more without defense. Just try to understand what your actions have done to her heart. And then give her what she needs. Honey, what do you need from me? That's a fabulous line to say. Honey, what do you need from me right now? And it might change. She might be all over. One day she might want a hug, and one day she's telling you to leave the room or to go away. Or one day she's crying and next day she's angry at you. But give her what she needs. If she needs space, give her space. If she needs you to listen more, then listen more. If she needs you to show affection or hug her, be careful in giving reassurance if you're not ready to do recovery. Oh, honey, no, listen, I'm really sorry. I won't do that again. Shut up. If she needs time, give her time. But ask her what she needs and then do your best to give it to her. Don't try to fix things or explain things or suggest why it's hard for you. No speeches. Less talk is better. And number 7, don't make it about you in any other way than owning the pain you've caused. That is about you. Own that. But don't, well, I'm trying. When are you going to let this go? I know that triggers you, but how long is it going to take? Like that's just really, really problematic. Number 8, never try to transfer blame to her or other people. Well, if my dad would have this, what would expect me to do? Any kid would have gone this way. See, like that somehow says, well, it's not my fault. Last I checked, you were the one that looked at porn. You're the one that, with your eyes, chased other women or actually chased other women physically. You're the one that did that. And get out of the blame game. Number 9, you don't have a right to be angry. I mean, tell you what, that's a real sign of immaturity and a real sign of complete lack of empathy is when in a discussion you get upset. Why? Because it's exposing you and you haven't owned it yet. See, when you humbly own your stuff, you don't get angry. But when you're trying to defend and minimize what you've done, you get angry at her and you get agitated and what's the point of even trying in my recovery? Like you don't give me a break. You don't back me. You don't support me. See, now it's all about you. The audacity of a man who's traumatized his wife through a selfish sexual addiction and then to be angry at her afterwards. Like, brothers, you need to wake up. There's no room for anger and empathy. And that's not for everybody because many of you have owned stuff and you're gentle and but just saying. Number 10. Now hear this clear. This is a little complicated because you see, if you apologize right away and you only do it once just to kind of, okay, I apologize. It's like apologizing to someone when they're still in a coma and you went through a red light and you hit a person in a crosswalk and they're in a coma and you say, I'm really sorry for running that red light and hitting you. They're not in position to receive what you're saying. And sometimes it's called cathartic. You're doing it to feel better, to check a box in your, well, I apologize. Okay, but keep in mind, when you apologize, it's almost like reactionary. It feels cheap, it feels canned, it feels too easy. The truth is, it's an apologetic journey. When she gets triggered and she's talking about how she's hurting, I'm going to illustrate what you need to say. Honey, let me say again to you that it is all about me, and I made some horrendous mistakes, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I caused you to have these triggers. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. And it's more about the tone, because see, it's not, well, I said I'm sorry. I mean, the very week afterwards, I said, I'm sorry. Like, won't you forgive me? Oh, golly, guys, you're about as empathetic as a toad under a tree. Come on. You likely need to review the apology and own your stuff for as long as she's hurt, because she's hurting because of you. Be patient in her journey to healing. Give her time, and you stay in your lane. Reminder, staying in your lane is do what you need to be doing to establish fully your recovery. Number 12, let others help you in seeing the hurts that you've caused her. There'll be guys on this call, guys in your small group, who'll point out to you where you're being unempathetic, where you're being selfish, and you need to listen. They got no agenda about helping you, for crying out loud. So I don't think you should have said that. Oh, what do you mean? Oh, no, shut up and listen. Why should I have said that? Tell me. Help me to see what I'm not seeing. That's a good friend who's holding up the mirror so you can see yourself and how you're coming across. 13. And this will often be done in the help with maybe a counselor, but write out your ownings, the ways that you've caused hurt, and take a step of full and sincere apology for all the wrongs committed. Notice it says write out. And then at the end of that, you say, what did I miss, honey? When guys come to me with their apology thing, I say, well, you only got 4 things down here. You just got started. You don't understand the trauma you've caused. Go back to the drawing board and say, God, show me what else. And see the connection between her healing and your honest commitment to recover. One of the greatest ways to bring healing for her is for you to stay committed in recovery, because she can't change you, and other men can't really change you. And by the help of God, there can be change, but you have to be willing to be accountable and willing to surrender to God. And then there is hope for her. And there's a connection between her healing and growing freedom to maybe trust you again, and your honest commitment to full and complete and lasting recovery. Without a doubt, and not number 15, this is not a point of order or least, but all the way through, you need to be asking God to help you see and experience the trauma that you created in her. Jesus, give me eyes that are other-centered. Give me eyes to feel her pain. And then ask what you can do to help her. Ask what would help in making things better. What would help in making things better? What do you need from me? What can I do for you? And ask that over and over. When she said, well, I don't see you doing the work from those manuals have never been opened. All right. I love you. I'm sorry for the hurt I've caused, and I will stay committed. So, gentlemen, now you ask the question, do you really understand what your sexual addiction has cost her? What's your level of empathy or the lack thereof? Now, I ask that you transition to the other document. And this is a practical outworking of the hurts that you've caused and your opportunity to see how well you're empathizing, how well you know the pain that you've caused. And actually, last night, I just redid this to make an exclusive check box here, assessment box for you as the addict to try to empathize what your spouse is feeling and the hurts that you've caused. I only had it before, just the partner recognizing the losses, and I just asked you to use the same form. This form is now for you as you work it through. So here's what's going to happen. This is an assessment. It's called Facing Your Partner's Losses, an assessment of the critical factors of grief and hurt of the spouse of a sexual addict. The instructions are these. This is now specifically for you. Circle the level of pain that you think your spouse has experienced or is still carrying because of your selfish behavior. The losses are many and they're hugely overwhelming to her. But how well do you get it? Score high for where you feel these are greater losses to her, and low for what you feel may be less significant ones. The factors of loss are listed randomly. It's not some special order. Return this discussion with your counselor and spouse. You'll maybe do it with your counselor, or you'll actually ask your spouse to fill out one similar to tell you how she feels about this, how big a deal it was to her. Now you're guessing how big a deal this was to her, how significant the loss is. And it doesn't do you any good to say, "Oh, I'm sure that was bad," and you circle all fives. Well, you're not being understanding if you're scoring a 5 and she scores it as a 2. So how much is this thing here actually affecting her? And then to actually do the assessment maybe 6 months or a year later to measure how accurately you are feeling with her. So eventually, when you really become empathetic, you know how she feels on these things, and your numbers and her numbers are getting closer and closer to one another. So we're just going to quickly look at the losses. The loss of life as she once knew it. Everything seems upside down, because as it all comes out, she discovers this, or you confess, or whatever, her life is upside down. How big a loss was that? The loss of your faithfulness to her in your marital relationship. I thought you loved me. I thought it was just only me. And I realized it's all these other people in your life, be they online or real. Number 3, loss of emotional safety. We got broken vows, shattered relationship. I don't feel safe with you. How big a loss was that to her? Loss of trust through your constant lies, secrets, and betrayal, telling half-truths and all that game. How big an impact was your lying to her? Loss of the beauty and the sanctity of marriage as God intended. The two shall become one. What God has joined together, that no one separate. The idea of being exclusive, faithful, loyal to one. Well, that beauty and sanctity of just the two of you, not just sexually, but emotionally and spiritually, that there's this huge bond of trust that's been blown up. How big a loss was that to her? The loss of sexual freedom without being traumatized, having flashbacks, memories, or comparison. To re-engage sexually with you is a huge leap of faith, because her mind can go, what kind of persons you're looking at, and am I pretty enough, or this, that, and it goes all over. And then if you've been unfaithful outside the marriage, then her mind can go into imagining things and visualizing you with the other person, and it's just a gong show of hurdle. Well, how big a loss of sexual freedom is that for her? Number 7, the loss of sacredness, of being sexually unique to each other. You see, if you are constantly drawn back to porn and masturbation, she doesn't feel unique, exclusive, or cherished in any way. How big a loss is that to her? The loss of respect for you and your choices is transferred to all men. Has she now been, men are all a bunch of pigs. They're all a bunch of slobs. I mean, have you now colored her view of all men? Loss of self-respect, because she has to carry the sense of feeling shameful by your addiction and humiliated that she doesn't, who's she going to talk to? She don't want to just talk to anybody, because some people don't understand the hurt she's carrying. And so there's this loss of self-respect that they're, I don't know who to talk to. Who do I talk to? And she just carries this. She's humiliated by your problem. She feels ashamed because it's her marriage that we're talking about, and your problem, your unfaithfulness. That just, well, how big a loss is that? Number 10, the loss of innocence and naivety over your dark sexual secret world. I've had women break down and cry because they found a trail of history of what you've looked at online. And she says, why would he look at that? Oh my goodness, I just like, what's wrong with him? And they lost innocence. You know, like if you've been unfaithful to her outside the marriage, she doesn't, she's lost this sense of innocence, and I can't imagine that would have happened, and it just blows it up. How big is that loss? Sometimes it's the loss of financial security. It's job loss, money wasted, other debts that have been caused, or with her sense of need to separate for a while and the huge cost financially there's a big loss. The loss of a secret free life. And now she has to carry all these sexual failures privately. And now hopefully she has people in her world that can be encouragement and can talk to her. But she now have to carry your dirty little problem, and she can't live authentic with the world, because if people knew what she was going through, well, first of all, she can't, because it affects you and them and you guys as a couple and everything. But she needs to have 2 or 3 people in her life, maybe a counselor and at least a couple others that she can really share her hurts with, and not just bottle up all this pain of these sexual failures. How big a loss was that? Number 13, the loss of a hope or dream of a marriage that she'd hoped it to be. She didn't get married for this. And so the whole excitement about our future has been compromised. Number 14, loss of extended family respect as they hear about your addiction. Why you guys separated? Well, and you know, some version of the story, even if you're going to be gracious on how you talk about your failures, extended family now struggle with. Matter of fact, one mother-in-law said this. You talk about extended family disrespect, but one mother said, wow, obviously you've got some things to learn in the bedroom if your husband's going to porn all the time. Now that silly lady mother-in-law made it about her failing in the bedroom, and it's not that at all. Lack of daily freedom as multiple triggers of your acting out rob her. She gets triggered and she doesn't have freedom. How big a loss is that? How about this one? Loss of worth through self-blame, not good enough, pretty enough, not sexy enough. She just does all this scrutiny, and her self-worth just plummets. That's very common. How big a loss is that? Loss of a pain-free life, as stress, anxiety, and disunity is a huge issue. The pain she's carrying, the disunity between you guys is emotionally so taxing. How big a loss is that? The loss of dignity through, some women have to get tested and retested for sexually transmitted diseases and the like. And it's just, you know, having to make that call and get an appointment and have the testing done and getting the report. How humiliating. How big a loss was that? Obviously, if you're acting outside the marriage. The loss of family innocence and fear of the need to protect children. She thinks, well, if you would do that, well, how do I know that our kids are safe? And now that fear of how this could go, and you know, if you would willing to do that, how do I know you won't do this too? And then so many women, it crushes their views of God, because they got married with the trust that this was going to be good, feeling that God was leading, and so they many times have a loss of faith in God. Did he allow this? What have I done wrong? Is he punishing me because my husband has his addiction? And it really messes up their faith in God. And if they lose trust in God, and it is hard for them to stay connected to the Lord, how big a loss is that? Well, gentlemen, there's a pretty clear indication of the kind of losses that your wife may have experienced through your sexual addiction. And the greater understanding you have for the pain you've caused, the greater responsibility and remorse that you carry for this, the more likely you're taking baby steps towards empathy. It's all about maturing as a man. Empathy, man, empathy. May God help you.